The date is April 30th, 1945. Somewhere beneath the burning ruins of Berlin, a man sits alone in a concrete room, 55 feet underground. Above him, Soviet artillery is tearing the city apart, block by block, street by street. The walls shake, the lights flicker, and Adolf Hitler, the man who plunged the entire world into the deadliest conflict in human history, knows that it is over. What happened inside that bunker in the final 24 hours has fascinated historians, psychologists, and investigators for nearly 80 years. Not because we want to glorify the man, but because understanding how one of history's greatest monsters spent his last hours on Earth tells us something profound about power, delusion, and the catastrophic cost of unchecked evil. This is the story of April 29th into April 30th, 1945. The last 24 hours of Adolf Hitler. To understand the final day, you have to understand the final weeks. By mid-April 1945, the Third Reich, once a military force that had conquered most of Europe, was collapsing on every front. Soviet forces had crossed the Oder River and were closing in on Berlin from the east. American and British forces were pushing from the west. Germany was being crushed from both sides like a vice slowly tightening. Hitler had retreated to the Führerbunker on January 16, 1945. This was no ordinary shelter. Built beneath the Reich Chancellery in central Berlin, the bunker was a two-level underground fortress with 18 rooms, its own power generator, water supply, and telephone network. Concrete walls nearly 4 meters thick. It was designed to survive almost anything except what was coming. Inside, the atmosphere was surreal. Staff members continued to carry out orders as though Germany still had a functioning army. Maps were updated, reports were filed, officers saluted and clicked their heels as if the war was still winnable. But outside, Berlin was dying. Fires burned on every horizon. The sound of Soviet guns grew louder every hour. Hitler himself had become a shadow of the man who had once commanded millions. Eyewitness accounts from those inside the bunker describe a broken figure, stooped, trembling, his left hand shaking uncontrollably, possibly from the advanced stages of Parkinson's disease. His eyes, once described as magnetic and terrifying, had gone dull. He shuffled through the corridors. He raged at maps. He ordered armies that no longer existed to counterattack positions that had already fallen. On April 29th, the day before his death, two things happened that give us a rare and deeply human window into Hitler's final state of mind. The first was his marriage. At around midnight, in the bunker's small conference room, Adolf Hitler married Eva Braun. She was the woman who had been his companion for over a decade, largely hidden from the German public. She had refused to leave Berlin when she had every opportunity to do so. On that night, wearing a black dress, she became Eva Hitler. The wedding was brief, witnessed by a small group of bunker staff. Champagne was brought out. People sat together and talked about the old days, holidays, places they had visited, better times that felt like they belonged to another world entirely. There is something deeply unsettling about this scene. A city burning above them. Hundreds of thousands of people dead or dying in the streets. And inside this concrete chamber, a wedding party reminiscing. The second major event of April 29th was the arrival of a telegram. The telegram brought news that Benito Mussolini, Hitler's longtime fascist ally, had been captured by Italian partisans the day before. He had been shot, and his body had been hung upside down in a public square in Milan, displayed for the crowds. When Hitler received this news, according to those present, something in him shifted. He had already been contemplating suicide, but Mussolini's fate appeared to harden his resolve. He was absolutely determined that he would not be captured. He would not be put on display. He would not be taken alive. Throughout the night of April 29th and into the early morning of April 30th, Hitler dictated two documents. The first was his personal will, a mundane accounting of his possessions, which, given the circumstances, strikes most historians as almost darkly absurd. The second was his political testament, a final statement to the German people and to history. In that testament, Hitler expressed no remorse. He accepted no responsibility. He blamed the war on international jury. He blamed his generals for the military failures. He appointed a successor government, and he ended with an instruction to the German people to continue the struggle and never surrender. Even in his final hours, the ideology held. The delusion was total. As dawn broke on April 30th, 1945, the Soviet army was less than a kilometer from the Führerbunker. You could not just hear the artillery now. You could feel it in your chest, in the ground beneath your feet, in the fillings of your teeth. The bunker shook almost continuously. Hitler rose late, as was his custom. He was briefed on the military situation, which had not improved. It never improved anymore. Soviet forces had taken the Tiergarten. They were fighting street by street toward the government district. It was estimated that they could reach the Reich Chancellery within hours, perhaps by the end of the day. Around midday, Hitler said his goodbyes. He moved through the bunker slowly, shaking hands with staff members, secretaries, military aides, the women who had served his meals and typed his letters. Many of them wept. Some of them, incredibly, still could not accept what was happening. Hitler reportedly remained composed during these farewells, eerily calm after weeks of violent outbursts. One of his secretaries, Traudl Junge, who survived the war and later gave extensive testimony about her time in the bunker, described how Hitler shook her hand but seemed to look through her, as if he was already somewhere else. After the farewells, Hitler returned to his private suite with Eva. The exact details of what followed have been pieced together from testimony given by bunker staff in the hours and years afterward. At around 3:30 in the afternoon, a gunshot was heard. Staff waited outside the door. There was silence. When they entered the room, they found Hitler slumped on the sofa with a gunshot wound to his right temple. Eva Braun had died beside him from cyanide poisoning. Her lips were slightly blue. There was no dramatic scene, no final speech. Just two bodies in a small concrete room beneath a city that was already in flames. In accordance with Hitler's explicit instructions given the previous day, the bodies were carried up through the bunker to the Reich Chancellery garden above. Gasoline was poured over them, and they were burnt. Witnesses described standing at the entrance to the bunker while the fires took hold, with Soviet shells exploding around them, raising their arms in a final salute to the burning remains of a man they had served and feared and, in many cases, followed into catastrophe. The burning took several hours. The remains, what little was left, were buried in a shallow crater in the garden. For decades, mystery surrounded what truly happened to Hitler's remains. The Soviet Union had conducted their own investigation in the aftermath of Berlin's fall. In the 1990s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, Russian authorities revealed that they had preserved fragments, including a piece of skull with a bullet hole, as evidence. More recent DNA analysis of those fragments, however, raised serious questions about whether they actually came from Hitler at all, suggesting the skull fragment may have belonged to a woman. The uncertainty has, over the years, fed countless conspiracy theories that Hitler escaped to Argentina, to Antarctica, to a dozen other destinations. Historians and forensic experts are near unanimous that Hitler died in the bunker on April 30th, 1945. The conspiracy theories persist, not because the evidence supports them, but because some part of the human mind finds it difficult to accept that history's most monstrous figures can simply cease to exist in an ordinary room, on an ordinary afternoon, without consequence or ceremony or judgment. But that is precisely what makes this story so haunting. There was no dramatic arrest, no trial. That would come at Nuremberg for others, but not for Hitler himself. No moment of public reckoning. No forced confrontation with what he had done. Somewhere between 50 and 70 million people had died in the conflict he started. 6 million Jewish men, women, and children had been systematically murdered in the Holocaust he designed and ordered. Entire nations have been shattered. Generations have been erased. And the man responsible died quietly on a sofa by his own hand before anyone could make him answer for any of it. The bunker itself was partially demolished by the Soviets after the war. What remained was buried, Today, the site is an unremarkable parking lot in central Berlin, marked only by a small, modest information board. There is no monument, deliberately, because Germany made the considered choice not to give the site any power or meaning beyond its historical record. That choice, to acknowledge the history but refuse to glorify the location, says something important. Memory without worship, truth without theater. In the end, the story of Hitler's last 24 hours is not really a story about one man's death. It is a story about what happens when an entire civilization allows one man to become more than a man, when fear and propaganda and silence let a voice become a verdict, and a verdict become a war, and a war become a wound in human history that we are still, all these decades later, trying to understand. The bunker is gone, the city rebuilt, the world moved on. But the lesson waits, patient and permanent, buried just beneath the surface. That evil does not always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like a movement. Sometimes it sounds like a promise. And sometimes, by the time the world recognizes it for what it truly is, 50 feet of concrete and a city in flames is already not enough to stop it.